Good morning. Wow, this is a big place. My wife and I were just discussing that in the little town of Tronadora that we live in, we could probably put, about 20 of the local houses in this room. Everything is so big here. We forgot how big everything was in the U.S. We went into Walmart the other day to do some shopping, and it's bigger than anything we have in Costa Rica. And we walked in, and we were just stunned by the sheer size of the building. And we were there for a while, and I was thinking, we've been in Costa Rica for 4.5 years. During those 4.5 years, I have learned Spanish. I have overcome a cross-cultural change to living in that culture. I have run from African killer bees. True. I have been pulled out of mud up to my waist by our Labrador Retriever because no one else could get to me. And twice I have almost died from a lethal bacteria. But none of that was as hard as getting my wife out of that Walmart. Hey, it works. Okay. We are missionaries in Costa Rica, and I'd like to relate one of the reasons why we ended up in Costa Rica was we were down there for language school. We were getting training in Spanish language, formal training. On our way to Peru, we were supposed to go to Peru. While we were in a language school primarily for missionaries, I was in a conversation class one day, and the assignment was it was a test, to come in and give a 15-minute presentation in Spanish, excuse me, about whatever topic we wanted. Well, being missionaries, I thought a topic about the Bible would be a good idea. So I prepared and presented the biblical timeline of the birth of Messiah. Okay, now at this time, my Spanish was about on the level of a 5-year-old. And that might be being a bit exaggerated. So I'm presenting it, and none of the other missionaries in the class seemed to be really interested in what I had to say. But at one point, the teacher stopped me and said, wait a minute. Start again from the beginning in English. I need to understand what you're teaching. This got my attention. And we started to realize that there was a tremendous hunger in Costa Rica for the truth in the Word. Costa Rica is predominantly a Catholic nation, although there's a tremendous Protestant presence there also, and a growing Messianic presence. And today, I hope, by the end of my little talk this morning, I hope that you will all understand why the Messianic movement is taking off down there and is growing, and it actually is prophesied in the Scripture that we're going to look at today. The Judah and Tamar, the prophecy of Bereshit 38, is actually a prophecy within a prophecy. Let's read just the opening to it so we all understand what I'm going to be sharing about. And it came to pass at that time that Judah went down from his brethren and turned into a certain Abdullamite, whose name was Hira. And Judah saw there a daughter of a certain Canaanite, whose name was Shua, and he took her and went into her, and she conceived and bore a son, and he called his name Er. And she conceived again and bore a son, and she called his name Onan, and she yet again conceived and bore a son and called his name Shelah. And he was at Hezib when she bore him. And Judah took a wife for Er, his firstborn, whose name was Tamar. Okay. That's the prophecy. That's the beginning of the chapter 38, and we'll get back to it in a minute. But we need to look at some things. The key to understanding any scripture, there's 3 keys to understanding any scripture. Context, and context. I don't care if you speak Hebrew, I don't care if you speak Greek, I don't care what language you speak. If you have a Bible in the language you speak, if you don't understand the context of what's going on, you're not going to understand what you're reading. So let's look first at context. Now, I'm going to be very brief because I want to teach on Bereshit 38, not Bereshit 37 and 39 and all that other. But we need to understand the context. In Bereshit 38, we begin with the story of Joseph and his family. Basically, the dreams of Joseph, the stars and the sun and the moon bowing down to him, the sheaves bowing down, the selling of Joseph. The brothers aren't real keen. Joseph's the favorite. They get the opportunity when he's out there. He comes to check on them. Dad sends him to check on the brothers, and they, instead of killing him, they actually sell him to the Ishmaelites who take him down to Egypt. They come back and lie to Jacob and say, Joseph's dead. Sorry, dude. We don't know anything about it. Not our fault. And so that's where we sort of leave Bereshit 37 or Genesis 37. Now, what is Judah doing? Because primarily it's Judah and Tamar, right? So what's Judah doing during this time? Well, Judah in Genesis 37, 26 through 27, Judah said to his brothers, "What profit is us for to kill our brother and cover up his blood? Come and let us sell him to the Ishmaelites and not lay our hands on him, for he is our brother, our own flesh, and his brothers listen to him." Now, I will refrain from any obvious Jew and money jokes that could be made at this particular time, but Judah is wanting to profit from this. But the point I want to make is Judah has departed at this point from following Torah, because the Torah says, it explains to us later in Deuteronomy 24:7, that if a man is caught kidnapping any of his countrymen of the sons of Israel, and he deals with him violently or sells him, then the thief, that thief shall die, so you shall purge the evil from among you. And I just present that to show that there are times when Judah, as well as ourselves, sort of turned a blind eye to what Torah says, what the teachings of Elohim are for our own benefit. Okay, it's what's best for us. We just kind of won't look at that, or we'll just ignore that because it's what we want to do. And we'll see this pop up again a little bit later on. But I just wanted to make that point that Judah apparently does that occasionally. Okay, now, Bereshit 38, we read the opening of that, the synopsis of that. Remember, we're looking at context. A synopsis of that is Judah has children. Judah takes a wife for his oldest. Successively, the two older children die for their sin. Tamar waits for Shelah the youngest. Tamar takes matters into her own hands. Judah goes into a harlot. Tamar is sentenced to death, and Tamar's righteousness is revealed. Okay, that's a synopsis of the chapter. We're all pretty familiar. Who's not familiar with this story? Everyone's read this story, right? How many of you have read it and going, what in the world is that doing in the middle of this story about Joseph? Yeah, because now we go back, we jump out of chapter 38. It's like, it's a parenthetical story. It's inside of another story. And we jump out, and 39, all the way through the end of 50, is a continuing story of Joseph, his rise to power. We're all familiar with that. The reconciliation of his brothers, of the 12 brothers, salvation of the family, and eventually at the end, Joseph's death. So we see in the middle of this story about Joseph and all the brothers, we see this little piece about Judah and some weird goings on. Okay, it's really a weird chapter. But we're going to look at that, and I hope in a little bit it won't be so weird, and you're going to see something that maybe you've never seen before. So what is the story of Joseph about? I mean, just a synopsis of the story of Joseph reveals to us, and I think the key verse is here, Genesis 45:7. God sent me, and it's Joseph speaking, of course, before you to preserve for you a remnant in the earth and to keep you alive by a great deliverance. Okay? That is what we see.